Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. My name's Christopher Donald and I'm going to be doing a demo on making a bowl on a hump mold, on a plaster hump mold. So go ahead and get some clay here. Alright, so first step is we're going to take our clay and we're going to use ram's head wedging to get this wedged up nice. And then once you've got it wedged, you want to compress it on end. And this is going to be a round form, so it's pretty easy. Just going to compress it into a disc. About 3/4 to 1 inch thick before we start using our rolling pin. You'd also use a cloth-covered mallet for that part. We're not going to use our rolling pin as a mallet. That is going to damage the bearings in it, unless, of course, it's a solid rolling pin, doesn't have any bearings. I guess you can do it if you'd like. And honestly, if you've paid for the rolling pin, do whatever you want. But they last a lot longer if you treat them right. Now, I don't want to make this too thin. It's going to be harder to drape if you make it too thin. So I'm going to make mine around maybe 3/8 of an inch, a little bit thicker than 1/4 inch. There we go. Once I've got that rolled out, I can compress my slab. I can use a metal rib for compressing the clay. And the point of this is compression. The side effect is smoothing. So I end up with a nice smooth surface, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm compressing the clay well. This mold is made out of plaster of Paris. I've got a separate video on how to make these. And I've got a handle in the back of it, making it a little bit easier to move around while I'm doing my casting. I did leave enough flat surface here, though, that I can put it on a platform, or I think I'll actually use my turntable. There we go. This is a nice floor-style turntable. My grandfather built this. And so I'm going to put my mold on my turntable, and then I'm going to drape my clay over my mold. If your mold is super dry, sometimes a nice trick is to spray it with a little bit of water before you start draping. That can make it spread a little bit easier. Now these parts here where I'm creating a fold, I'm going to push that open, make that fold flat again, then kind of ease the clay down. Point here is that you're trying to give the clay a chance to stretch and to bit by bit from the top out to get stuck down to the plaster surface. We use plaster molds because the plaster is absorbent, it's porous, and it's going to be absorbing water from the clay at the same rate that the clay is drying from the air around it. And I purposely decided to use this steeper mold for this demo because an abrupt bend like this, like a half sphere, especially a small one, is one of the harder forms to have to drape mold. So I'm going to get all the problems with this that I wouldn't get with, say, like doing a plate mold or something. All right, I'm going to carefully cut the excess clay around the border. You do want to start with a slab that's too big. The reason for that is that it's going to make it so that any of the inconsistencies in the slab that were pushed out to the edges aren't going to be part of the final product. And I don't want to try and force the issue and get this pushed all the way with all this extra hanging here. Go ahead and just trim this off. I'm being careful to just kind of trim it in midair and not run this knife against the soft plaster. There we go. All right, so I'm going to use a motion kind of almost is really similar to rolling out a coil. I'm just spreading my fingers out really wide and kind of trying to get as many of these spots at once as I can, and feeling anywhere where I get a section that wants to pop up into a little crease. I'm going to flatten that out. Use my other hand kind of just gradually get this so it's all nice and stuck down. There we go. Perfect. I would say a pin tool is one of the best things for cleaning off this bottom edge. So you don't want to scrape the plaster. Sometimes I'll use the back of my knife instead of, let's get this started here. There we go. Instead of using anything that's remotely sharp. And the, the turntable is like the exact same size as my piece here. I can go ahead and put this smaller thing up there. There we go. So I can kind of get underneath this a little bit more. So you can see my knife is actually running along the bottom of the mold and not on the side of the mold. I don't want to damage that soft plaster with a metal tool. I could just use a wooden tool as well for that. I'm pretty careful though, so I feel good about using the metal one. Then I'm going to use my metal rib. I could also use a rubber rib for this compression process. So again, I'm going to come at this from different directions. I'm going to compress the clay onto the mold, and the side effect is that it's going to smooth it. But the idea is that you really want it compressed well, because this process is what convinces the clay that it is now going to be this shape. It wants to remember being a flat slab. Now I'm convincing it, you are now a dome. You're no longer a flat slab. So this compression is going to do that. Generally, hump molds are meant for part of it to get trimmed off after you're all done. So you form something that's a little bit bigger than you want, and then this extra gets trimmed later on. All right. While it's on here, I could do something, give it a pattern. Let's go ahead and move this down into a better position for myself. And so I've got a flat edge here we can use. And I'm just going to go ahead and give this a little quick fluted pattern. One of the great things about using hump molds is that we can work on the outside of them. We can use the support of the mold for stamping, or things like this, and it's all supported. And working on the foot is often the part that's difficult with these kinds of forms. So if you're using a drape mold where you're draping the clay on the inside of the mold, you can't work on the foot until after it's taken out of the mold. Where with a hump mold like this, I can work on this outside, I can put a foot on it, all while the clay is still fairly soft. That's a big advantage. There's no single process that's good for everything. So this is one you can add to your toolbox, and it will be another good thing you know how to do. There we go. So now I've got a nice spiral fluted pattern in the outside of this, and I'm going to want to go ahead and put a foot on it while it's this soft. So we'll pop him back up onto the turntable. There we go. And I want it on the turntable so that I can just mark where the foot's going to go. There we go. Now, you want to make sure when you've got something that's this abrupt of a curve, when you put the foot on it, remember that the foot needs to stick up higher than that center point, higher than this. So when I add that foot, I have to make sure that the foot isn't too far out, or the foot has to be really, really tall to clear the center. Okay, go ahead and score this. Actually, go ahead and stick it. Oh, keep wanting to bring this down a little bit so the angle's better. Get him closer to the tabletop there. And then I pop him up a little higher. There we go. That's much more comfortable. Keep things at a comfortable height. We're working on them. Nice. I'm going to grab a little bit of water here. Make sure that I've got a nice squishy connection. And I may even need to touch this up again before I actually go ahead and put the coil on it. But get this one done first. All right, then I'm going to need to roll out a coil for the foot. When I start a coil, I start by squeezing the clay, getting it closer into the shape that I'm going to want it when I roll it. This squeezing process is basically wedging the clay. Then I'm going to roll it out, spreading my fingers out nice and wide, moving in a W. Once that's nice and consistent, I'm going to take and throw it down onto the table. That makes it into a half round. Now I can score the flat side of the half round. I've got a video on handle making, and one of the handles that I show is made using a little loop of wire that you can pull through a lump of clay, and it kind of extrudes the handle for you. You can use that same trick to make a little loop that you can use for making these half rounds. I'll actually show you. Here we go. So if I wanted to, go ahead and show that to you. If I wanted, I can take a much bigger piece of clay, wedge that a little bit, there you go, squeeze that into a bigger coil, a rough coil. Just kind of smooth them out a little bit. There we go. And then I could take my tool here and just go ahead and pull that right through. There we go. And this is going to give me a perfect foot. There we go. Perfect half round. Half round cross section, exactly even, all the way without really having to do much work. So consider making yourself a tool like this if you find that you have a hard time making consistent, even coils to do your feet. Okay, so I got this one all ready to go. I've talked a little bit, blah, blah, blah. So this is dried out. And go ahead and touch this up real quick. Make sure both these connections are nice and soft when I put them together. All right, looks good now. Go ahead and I've got lots of extra coil. That's fine. Tons of extra coil. Pinch some of it off. I'm going to overlap this. Cut through both at a 45-degree angle. But not all the way into the base that I've got on there. There we go. That makes it so that it's going to be exactly the right length, but I don't have to measure. Score my ends. Put those together. All right. I want to just make sure that this is fastened down. I'll do that nice and quick. And then what I want to do is take something which is starting off, I'm going to squish that one, starting off as a half round, and I'm going to take it from being a half round like a U shape, and I'm going to squeeze it so it's more of a V shape, more like that. As I work my way around this, let's go to the side here so you can kind of see what my fingers are doing. I'm going to compress this down, get it fastened really well, and kind of press this foot into more of an inverted V. And when you're doing feet with hand building, it's all about just this process of kind of doing it consistently and kind of taking your time with it. So on the wheel, you can kind of like muscle your way through this a lot quicker and a lot faster. With hand building, I just want to be careful and kind of take my time doing this. And let's see, so I'm the right tool for the job here. So I've got this all flattened down, but I don't want to actually damage the fluting that's on here. So now I'm going to just take a wooden tool and kind of press this a little bit more evenly. There we go. That sure looks pretty good. And then let's grab a sponge. One sec. You don't want to use a clean sponge to wipe clay because the clay body is made out of different particle sizes. So it'll wipe off the fine particles and leave something rough behind. So you want to load your sponge up on a piece of scrap clay first. Then I'll take this, and I'm going to be thinking about the outside part of this curve first. So I'm going to make like a little cradle with the sponge, but then my outside finger is going to be doing all of the work at first and just kind of carefully smoothing the outside. And I'm just being careful that I don't rub away my fluting. If this was going to be blended, where if I left this so it was just a flat surface, way quicker and easier, I just blend it right in with a wooden tool, clean it with a sponge. I actually wanted to do one that was a little more difficult to show you because if you did something with a patterned outside, you're going to run into this. Then I'm going to reverse, and I'm going to use my finger on the inside to kind of put a little bit more pressure and clean that up. There we go. Oh, all done. All nice and clean. Good habits. Squish up your clay, put it back in the bag if you're not using it. And I'd also like to put a little piece of paper on top of this before trying to take it off. Junk mail, that'll work. Nice thing about these molds, makes it really easy to move these things. So I'm going to take and get one hand underneath it, the other hand on this little board here, and I can just flip it over. With that, I flipped it directly onto the board that I want it to rest on. And the whole time that this has been on this mold, it's been drying. So the plaster is already removing moisture from the clay. And because of that, as I work my way around here, I can kind of pop it loose from the mold. I'm going to hold this handle, and I'm going to kind of push down on the wall a little bit as I rotate. I'm trying to get the air to kind of get underneath it. Oop, and there we go. And kind of we'll release the suction at some point and just pop right out. And that's it. So I would actually not mess with this anymore at this point. I want to let this air dry for a little, and then I can come back and I can mark the trim line now if I want. A lot of times people ask me, well, how do you get the foot squared to the rim? And I actually don't do that when I'm first making the foot. I just go ahead and put the foot on as square as I think I can get it. But then when it's sitting on the foot, I now square the foot to the rim. So let's go ahead and get this guy so and this is actually a really good one to do on the wheel. If you've got a wheel and you're comfortable with the wheel, you can just stick it onto a wheel for tracing this line. I'll go ahead and do it here. So I'm just spinning this and then just tracing a line. One more. There you go. That's going to give me a place that I know I can trim it later. But I don't want to do any of that until this is leather hard. So let's set this aside for a little, let it dry, and then when we come back, we'll go over trimming and finishing up that top edge. All right, be back soon. Bye. Hello, welcome back. I'm going to be finishing up the top edge of this piece that we formed earlier. And go ahead and pull my turntable up a little bit closer here. So now that this has stiffened up a little bit, I can take off the excess. And to do that, I'm going to use a surform because this is the least likely to kind of move it around and cause any damage. It's nice and sharp, and so it's going to plane down the clay really easily. And I can start, if I want, just by going around and getting rid of that first layer, which I know is going to go. And then if I've traced a line on here, I can just go right to that line that I've traced. If not, then I can just do it by eye. See, this goes very quickly. All right, so I'm going to get down to its level here, and I'll be able to see exactly where I need to remove it from both the line that I traced onto it and just being able to look at the level of it. Work my way around, ensuring that I'm going to have to vacuum when I'm done. The problem with all these little shreds, don't leave them on the floor. You definitely have to get rid of them because if they dry, they're going to be hazardous. Okay, now I'm going to clean off this inside edge, and this is just a big enough curve that I can fit my surform inside here and just kind of take this very small hard edge off of the inside of the clay. There you go. And then I can remove a similar small bevel on the outside. There we go. And then as far as this rim, honestly, the easiest way for probably this one is going to be to just use a little bit of a sponge and just smooth it off. You can also use a soft red rubber rib, but this is a thinner edge, and I actually feel like the rubber rib is overkill. So I'm going to take my sponge, load it up with a little bit of extra material so I don't wipe the fine material off of here. Change my orientation so you can see what I'm doing, and I'm just going to make like a little cradle with the sponge and work my way around. I'm going to concentrate on pressing on the outside of it first. So kind of the outside edge and maybe a little bit on the top. And then when I go back, I can concentrate more on the inside edge. And I just go back and forth a couple times with this. I'm supporting it from the other side with my hand as much as I can, because this is a thinnish slab. It's like a 1/4 inch. There we go. And this is to remove the marks from the surform and to just give me a nice, pleasant, rounded edge. Now you could, of course, do other things with it at this point. I'm keeping the demos more focused on basic techniques right now than any of the more advanced techniques, but you could absolutely add a coil, give this a whole separate lip other than just using the wall thickness as the lip. That would be perfectly reasonable to do. I'm not going to cover it in this one, but I'm going around and I'm just kind of checking that outside bevel and giving it a little bit more of a wipe. It doesn't look like it's right there. So yeah, you can absolutely add other pieces to it. I didn't need to cut the lip out perfectly symmetrically either. Depending on what effect I'm going for aesthetically, I could have cut the lip unevenly. So like, let's say I wanted to make each of these flutes into its own separate little, kind of almost like a flower petal. I could have cut all of those out, and then it would have had a more of a fluted edge, and that might have gone even better with the design that I've put into the outside here. That again, though, is aesthetics. And consider, make like a bowl like this, and then make the same bowl, and then see what else you can do with it. That's a really good way of kind of teaching yourself as you're learning and figuring out what your process is and what is important to you as far as what you like to make, and refining that. They're really, people say, oh, there's no such thing as like rules or good or bad in art, but there kind of are where it comes to what your intention is. If my intention with this is to make it organic, this edge treatment isn't actually 100% effective for that. So I would say that that's actually not good for what I'm trying to achieve. My stated goal is to make this organic, and this edge isn't going to work for that. If my stated goal is to make this more geometric, then that actually does fit. I have a geometric edge. Maybe I could make it more geometric, but it's actually more fitting from that perspective than it would be as being organic. So just kind of think about things like that as you're growing and developing as an artist, and you'll eventually get much better at it. So thanks for joining me. Remember to subscribe if you'd like to get notified of new videos as they drop. And otherwise, I'll see you back here soon. Take care. Bye.